You're blessed. Welcome to another episode of Dominion Today. We're so excited to be with you guys. We want to talk today about something really specific, and I know it happens in each and every one of our lives. It's called conflict. I know it's a tough thing to talk about, but we're going to try to fit this in within 2 episodes, so get ready because we're going to dive in, and we're not only going to discuss what happens in conflict, but we're going to discuss and give you some tools to resolve conflict with people that you may be around. So we'll be right back with more.
Hey everybody, welcome back. We just want to kind of dive into, just to lay some groundwork, level the playing field. What is a conflict, right? Because conflict is normal. There's nothing you can do to avoid conflict. Even with the person that you love the most, you can try and do every possible thing you can to please them, right? Mm-hmm. And it's going to happen. So, you know, let's just embrace it, you know?
Not necessarily embrace it, but yeah, I see what you're trying to say.
I'm not saying look for it, go looking for it all the time, but embrace the process. So basically a conflict defined is a difference that prevents agreement, simply. A difference that prevents agreement. You want toothpaste A, I want toothpaste B. At the end of the day, someone is going to get either A or B. Someone has to give in. Mm-hmm. There's got to be a little compromise, a lot of communication, right? Yep. So again, a difference that prevents agreement. It could also be a battle, a fight. And so actually when we were, I'm reading my notes, they happen to be in Spanish. When we recorded in Spanish, there was a phrase that if I translate it the best possible way, it's an armed confrontation. Mm-hmm. An armed confrontation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we come into a conflict armed and ready to just come, guns blazing.
Yeah, and we really come armed with what we believe and perceive to be the truth of the matter. We believe to be right.
The only truth.
And the only truth, correct. And so that's what really creates the conflict. And really conflict has its root in 2 different things. The first thing is that perspective. You have a perspective about something, then someone else does not have a perspective. And then also an event that may have occurred. That, you know, there's a disagreement and the like, and conflict arises. And so that's the 2 places where the root of conflict comes from. Now, the interesting thing is that sometimes within that perspective thing, a lot of times it's not even on purpose. It can be on purpose, but most of the time it's not on purpose. In other words, someone didn't do it maliciously to hurt you. And yet, on the other side of the event, on the the other second part of that of conflict, and where it roots from, is that usually stems from somebody doing something to you, and so you react accordingly, and that creates a conflict or disagreement, right? Or you come armed with what you believe to be the only truth to confront a person, and there you have that conflict.
Because our default is they're out to get me.
Unfortunately, that's the case. Unfortunately, even as believers, we even look at other believers that way. We look at other believers and say, oh, they're just trying to hurt me. Where really the matter is, it may not be that they're trying to hurt you. It may be the fact that you remind them of something negative that happened in their life, and so that creates their perspective about what's happening. But then because of that, an event occurs. Mm-hmm. and there's a conflict between two people, you and that person, or even within leadership. You feel that you heard the Lord concerning something, but your leadership doesn't agree with you, and so you believe that to be your truth, and so that creates a little bit of a conflict, especially if you understand your position as far as not being a leader, being a lay person within a ministry or what have you, and the understanding of submission of that authority of leadership in your life.
I was having a flashback of these moments where we would lead worship in New York, and part of our worship team, we had a really great leader. And what he did, one of the things that I really appreciated about him is that he had the worship leaders rotate. So it wasn't just one person leading worship every single Sunday. He rotated us. And I think that was a great way of equipping us, and just a lot of great learning experience for everybody. But one of the things I remember leading worship is that we would have hand signs, right? Because you gotta find whatever tricks or tips you need to kind of lead your team.
This is halt.
Yeah. Take it to the
This
top.
is repeat. Yeah, take it to the top. This is the second verse in the song.
And so at leading worship, we would try and be like really subtle. But every now and then, we would get our signals mixed up. And so as a person leading worship, I would be like, all right, 2, or take it to the top. And the whole team went in the complete opposite direction. And again, it's like, okay, I would either get frustrated, or I'm trying to figure out a way to get the team to where I feel like the Lord wants us to go next. And they're just not going there. I'm trying to go in this direction. They're all going in the opposite direction. And again, I don't think, and I don't believe that it was a malicious team intent to go, oh, Blanca's given that signal. No, we're going in the opposite direction. It was just either a miscommunication or they didn't see my signal. So
or you gave the wrong signal.
It could very well be. I haven't been wrong many times, but it could be. It could be.
Which leads me to that next thing that happens within conflict. A lot of times we tend to think that we're right within the midst of conflict, and so it really has to get to a point in our lives to where we actually understand. Like in that example, could the whole entire team be wrong, or could it actually be me? And that's a self-evaluation thing, and oftentimes we don't want to do that because we think when we self-evaluate, we're blaming ourselves, and that's part of the case. But you also have to take an introspective look and try to figure out, okay, am I wrong here? Really be honest with yourself, and if you're wrong, and if the Lord's telling you you're wrong, well, guess what? You need to correct yourself and make adjustments accordingly. And so that's part of that conflict issue.
Actually, can I just say something real quick? I was reading a blog this week, and Michael Hyatt was talking about leadership. It was an old post. And he was assessing, because really what you're describing is you're assessing the situation, hindsight. And he asked a question that I was like, wow, I think that's going to stick with me. He said, what about my leadership caused my team to go in the wrong direction? And I was like, okay. I mean, because again, our default is to blame. It's the other person. They're out to get me. But it's if we take a moment and assess, okay, what was it about my leadership? What was it about how I communicated my message that caused the team conflict, or that caused the team to go in a wrong direction, bringing conflict between myself and the team? Yeah,
interesting. That's really good. In Proverbs chapter 15 is probably one of the famous scriptures that we've read many of times, but I want to bring it into context concerning conflict, because as we defined already, that conflict is oftentimes when you come armed, right? Armed for battle in that conflict. And so in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1 says, a gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. A gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. And oftentimes when we come in the midst of conflict, we come guns a-blazing, right? We believe we're totally right. We believe we have the truth in us. We believe our perspective of what happened is on our side, in our favor. And so we present the idea, but we don't present it in a way that actually promotes dialogue and actually promotes communication. We present it in a way that we want that person to repent right then and there. That's really the goal, especially as believers, unfortunately. We want that person to drop to their knees, crying, weeping before the Lord, and say, I apologize, I missed it. Well, the simple fact of the matter, that is very seldom happens. Very seldom happens. Why? Because they actually believe that their perspective is correct as well. You know, and oftentimes we tend to look at conflict and we either, unfortunately, we've realized quite a bit in these days that a lot of people avoid conflict. And to try to sweep it under the rug, and that creates an even bigger issue, because the way I shared with it in the Spanish version of this program is that we have a conflict. We take that conflict. We don't know how to deal with it, so we put it away. We put it aside, and that's another conflict arises, and so we take it and then we put it away for later. And then sooner or later that blows up to where really you go in and you break your piggy bank, because now you're finally able to confront the person, and now you're coming historical, which we're going to talk about later, not becoming historical in the midst of conflict, but you become, or you want that person now to totally pay for everything that has happened in the past, where the conflict conversation is occurring because of a specific conflict that has occurred, and that person may want to talk to you. You finally work up the courage, I guess, to talk to the person. Really, it's a question of fear, because you don't know how to react. You don't know how to deal with the person, and you don't know how the person is going to react in that way. And oftentimes when we start to put those things away, we really don't put them away per se and forget about it. We put it away and we start meditating on it. We start rehearsing what we're going to do. We start rehearsing what we believe that person is going to respond. But we don't ever take the opportunity to actually do it. And so we create this huge conflict resolution on our own side, based on our imagination, on our perception, and what we believe is things are going to happen, and it never really gets resolved. It just stays burning within you, and you continue to rehearse it until it blows up and finally comes about.
And there's an ingredient, a main ingredient in the example that you've just described, because there's a deception when you go, you know what, it's okay, I'll get over it, you know, it'll be all right, no big deal. We deceive ourselves, and we're deceiving the other person, because we're, you know what, hey, don't worry about it, it was no big thing, no big thing.
Actually, verse 4 on Proverbs 15, I took a note of it. Gentle words are a tree of life. A deceitful tongue crushes the spirit.
Wow. Wow. Talk about context. Wow.
Because now you're deceiving yourself, and you're crushing your spirit, because really what you're going to do, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I can guarantee you that, you're going to rehearse that entire situation, if not once, at least multiple times.
Yeah, because you're not just putting away the experience, you're also packing away for a later date all of those inner conversations that you've had, and so it becomes a mess. I'm hearing the phrase, don't bring a knife to a gunfight, right? And sometimes in a conflict, we may be the one that brought a knife, or maybe we even come unarmed, totally innocent, walking into the conflict, and the other person, man, they're packing. And they come guns blazing.
Well, time is flying by. We're going to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back and delve into more of this conflict issue. All right? We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We've been talking about conflict, laying some groundwork. So give me some information, give me some equipping. What do you do in the midst of conflict?
Cry. No, yeah, it does. It's a reality. Sometimes you may cry. I say that jokingly. If you want to call it passive aggressive, you say it, whatever. But it really, in the midst of conflict, there's some things that you actually have to maintain. All right. Probably one of the biggest things that we're going to share with you about how to deal with conflict and what do you do in the midst of conflict is this: visualize a future with that person. You have to visualize a future with that person. I'm going to say it the way the Lord told me and then the way I wrote it. I'm going to read it. So if you are unable to visualize a future with the person, you will be impotent in transforming or resolving the conflict. In other words, your inability to see a future with that person in your life is going to close the door to the possibility of a resolution to that conflict, or even just transforming it to see God manifest in the midst of it. Because God will always manifest himself where he is invited. Where he's not invited, he's not going to manifest himself. And so if you come with guns a-blazing and you don't see any future, you're already decided that you're leaving, wherever it may be, your job, your church, wherever it may be, you decided because of that conflict you're leaving, you've already prepared it in your heart and that's it, then honestly, just go ahead and tell them the conflict and say goodbye. That's it. Because you have convinced yourself and you haven't prepared yourself for the possibility of continuing forward and visualizing a future with that person. If you don't visualize that future, you are going to fail miserably in trying to resolve the conflict in an amicable way to where nothing changes and you can progress forward. You know, one of the key things about the conflict is there's two parts to it, aside from where the root is. But you have to operate in the ministry of reconciliation, which God has given us according to the scriptures. He has given us the ministry of reconciliation so that we can reconcile ourselves not only to God, but also to the brethren, all right? To the people who have offended, people who have offended us, all right? But the job of restoration, honestly, is not our job. There's a misconception that we believe that we have to restore. We do not restore. God is the one that restores. God is the one that restores us back into relationship with him, and God is the one that will restore a relationship that you have with somebody else that you have conflict. But you have to begin with the ministry of reconciliation. You have to be willing to reconcile with that person, and then that's when God steps in and says, oh, hey, I'm going to restore this, because out of this conflict, this relationship is going to be so much stronger, which is amazing thing that you can actually realize. And also you need to keep in mind in the midst of conflict.
Actually, I'm remembering right now, a friend of mine was sharing a story just yesterday about a group, a music band that there are two brothers. They're really famous. I think if I say their name, you'd probably know them. But there are two brothers that did music on the road a lot, and they got to a point where they were together all the time. They're brothers, so on a personal level, they're together all the time. And they got to the point where they would get into fist fights right before going on stage. And God had to do a major work in them to the point where it took a few years. And apparently they wrote an album that really was how they processed, being better brothers, how they processed the whole conflict and animosity between them. And so now they are more successful than ever. But, like you said, and I think the misconception is, resolving a conflict, the goal end in mind is for you to be best friends again in the end. That might not be the case. I mean, if it's on your job, guess what? If you have a conflict on Friday, you gotta show up on Monday. You can't just go, I'm out of here. I mean,
you can, but it's not going to be beneficial to you.
Yeah, on so many levels. Or in ministry, if you have a gripe with the pastor or the leader or the Sunday school teacher who you didn't like what they said to your child, I mean, you can't just up and leave. There's so many other layers and so many other people connected to a decision like that. You can't do that.
I oftentimes have heard leaders say, well, we're all imperfect, right, in the church. So if you're looking for a perfect church, you're not going to find it, right? And that's true. It is very true. As a leader, I can tell you that. We are all imperfect. We're all miss the mark sometimes. We all mess it up. But oftentimes we fail to realize that same concept and that same principle in the outside world. We live in an imperfect world. The person that cut you off may not want to have done it maliciously. Maybe the person didn't see you. But road rage has become something of a huge conflict. People get killed out of this that rage that comes out. But if you realize, you know what, I'm okay. We didn't have an accident. Let's just continue on. Let's just move on. You will live life so much easier, especially on the road of life as a whole. But in the world, we live in an imperfect world. There are people that are going to offend you. There are going to be people that are going to hurt you. But you need to understand how to resolve that conflict in a healthy way, to where you can progress forward, not dismiss the entire relationship, but maybe progress forward in what God has for you in the midst of that. Oftentimes we think about how God assigns people to some places. And we believe, as a ministry, her and I as ministers and as apostles, overseers of ministries, we believe that God sets not only the pastor in the house, but the people in the house. And so he sets people in the place that they're supposed to be. That's why we always tell people when we're pastoring, you pray if you want to be a part of this ministry. We're not going to try to convince you. We're not going to sit and have coffee with you and start to vision cast without you making a decision. Because we want you to find what the Lord wants you to do, and you stick to what he is telling you. Now, if he tells you to stay, then you stay until he tells you to leave. Now, in the midst of that, oftentimes conflict occurs. Because why? Because many times when people go to a church and they start to fellowship and they start to love the ministry, they start to love the church, but what happens? The honeymoon phase comes to an end. Especially when you start putting them in leadership and asking a little bit more from them and responsibility from them. What happens is that conflict arises and they don't know how to deal with it, and so they just up and leave. Go ahead.
Well, there's something that you say in that whole conversation when I've heard you talk to people about that is really like, ugh. And what you say is, you don't get to choose your pastor.
No, you don't. There is no scripture in this entire Bible, and I'm using my iPad illustratively, the Bible's in there, but you do not get the choice to choose who your pastor is and who your church is going to be. That's between you and God praying. And I think people hopping churches back and forth is not a good thing. It is a bad thing. Now, I understand you trying to find a place where to go. That's different. I'm talking about you go to one church, you get bothered and offended because someone, spoke to your child incorrectly or inappropriately in your opinion, and so you just up and leave rather than dealing with the issue, talking to somebody about it and getting a resolution to it. Because that person may not have done it maliciously, and quite frankly, children oftentimes exaggerate. That's the truth of the matter. And so you have to figure out what the details are before you make a final decision, especially like that. And so if you don't have the right to choose where God is sending you as far as the church is concerned, many times we pray, Lord, give me this job. And the Lord gives you the job, and you're in the job, and conflict arises, the honeymoon phase ends, and you want to leave all over again. But what happened to God telling you you're supposed to be there? And we almost think that God's a schizophrenic and he forgets what these people are about. These people, these attitudes. He knew the attitude of your boss. Yeah. He knows the attitude and character traits of your pastor. Yeah. When he sent you there, he knows all about it. And he's working with them just as much as he's working with you. But the real meat of the matter needs to be that you stick to what God has told you to do. Yeah. Because that's where he has placed you.
Yeah, and just to tie that thought, just like God told you that that's where you need to be, we're not advocating that you remain in a place that's unhealthy for you, that you are deteriorating. Just like God told you that's where you need to be connected, you can also seek the Lord, and there may be a time where God will say, okay, enough. It's time for you to move on. Yep. One of the other things, I want to read Ephesians in just a moment, but one of the other things, please, for the love of God, be respectful, because you can disagree respectfully. And that looks like so many different ways. I don't even want to pinpoint things, because there are some people that they seem like they're speaking kindly, but it's on the inside, it's just gross. Their attitude is wrong, their motives are wrong. So that's between you and God, and you just know. You know when you're not 100% walking in respect and honor. So at the forefront of everything, and rooted and grounded in love, you can conflict and disagree respectfully. So keep that in mind. Be respectful, be honorable. Whatever you say today, are you going to wake up tomorrow morning and say, I wish I didn't say that? Or are you going to say, okay, that was as kind as I could have possibly been, that was as respectful as I could have possibly been?
And I hear people actually saying, well, they have to earn my respect. And really the fact of the matter is, if you want to go scripturally, you have no right to say that whatsoever. You have no right whatsoever to say that. There is no scripture that tells me that a person has to earn your respect. None whatsoever. So I'm going to put it as bluntly as I can, but yet as loving as I can, because I know what condition of my heart, what I'm saying to you right now in the context of what you just said. Get off your high horse and allow somebody to talk to you with respect. And you talk to that person with respect. You don't have to disrespect anybody. You can communicate in a tone. You know, the book that we read,
Love and Respect.
Love and Respect. I don't think I'll ever forget that. It always comes up over and over and over again. Even joking around between her and I, we'll say it. But, you know, you can be wrong with a loud voice. Just as much as you can be right with a loud voice, and you can be wrong with a low voice just as much as you can be right with a low voice. And so it doesn't matter your tone of voice. It matters the attitude of the heart and how it's being communicated. And that has to be at a level of respect. You respect the person. Yes, there's a conflict that has arisen, but you have to understand that person is still a person that deems respect, because you want respect back when they talk to you. So as you sow it, you can reap it. If you don't sow it, then you're never going to reap it.
And it's the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Boom. Okay. So Ephesians chapter 4, verse 24 says, and put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. We're going to delve into this a little bit more in our next program. But again, I just want to say that anger is not a sin. Anger is a sign that something is wrong. It's when you let that anger go out of control and you get all willy-nilly and you know, start doing crazy things where you're in the wrong. But anger is not a sin. You have permission to be angry. It's a sign that something is not right. And again, we're going to continue this in our next program, give you some tools, some things that have really worked for us. So we pray that it's been a blessing. Well, this concludes our time for today.
Yes.
And remember that you are created by God for dominion today.
You're blessed.